Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank each one of you who have joined us today this afternoon for a technical session titled Scanning the Investment Landscape, Emerging Opportunities Beyond Lending Model. It's my pleasure to invite the esteemed panel for the session. The session is co-curated in partnership with Impact Investors Council, and the session shall be moderated by Ms. Jyotsna Krishnan, Managing Partner, Elevar Equity, and the panelists include Mr. Anmol Warange, Director Investments at Omdia Network India, Ms. Mona Kachwaha, Partner at Unitas Capital Empower, Mr. Utpal Issar, Co-founder Servagram, and Mr. Chirant Patil, Co-founder Discovery. We look forward to an insightful discussion. And with this, I would like to hand over the baton to Jyotsna. Over to you, Jyotsna.
Thanks a lot. Hello, everyone. It's an exciting discussion, a subject that is really close to my heart, given that India as a country is heading towards really interesting times. And all of us have been tracking these trends, both from a secondhand distance in terms of what's published in media, as well as in day-to-day lives around us. What makes it very interesting is the composition of the panel today. We've got two people who are practitioners, who are literally battling it out on the ground, building institutions. And we have two members of the panel who have seen the world of capital and are looking to deploy that capital in the space. I myself have spent close to 8 years in the context of a financial services institution in a more operational capacity, and the last 10 years working extremely closely with entrepreneurs building businesses for underserved markets and mass market customer segments. And there couldn't have been a better time to have this discussion. So welcome to all the panel members. What I think would be really interesting to kick off with is if we could go around the table, not only with a little bit of personal introduction, what brings you into what you're doing, but also some headlines about what your fundamental thesis is about the subject, about the topic we're going to be discussing today. We do have adequate time for today's discussion, so it'll be nice to get that personal context and overview so that as we dive into discussions through the rest of the time available, it'll be more relevant for the audience as well. So maybe we can kick off with you, Mona, if you can introduce yourself, and then we can go over to Amol next.
Sure. Thanks, Jyotsna, and it's a pleasure to be here. Especially happy to have this panel come together and all the insights that I'm looking forward to hear from my co-panelists. By way of background, I have spent the last 27 years, about half and half in banking and impact investing. And out of those 27 years, about 20 years have been spent in some shape or form with credit businesses, business and risk management of credit portfolios at Citibank, and subsequently at Caspian, where I managed the India Financial Inclusion Fund that invested in a host of lending companies. So I've, like Jyotsna, I've therefore experienced both operating and investing sides of credit business. As far as non-credit businesses are concerned, I did have the opportunity to work in the liabilities part of the bank at Citi, where we launched the first branchless banking product that the country had seen back in '97 at Citi, and we worked through partnerships. So that experience has also informed in the way I'm looking at the whole fintech partnership approach that is relevant to this discussion. Also at Caspian, we invested in a business correspondent, a very difficult model, but one that facilitated banking and remittance services in deep rural areas. Now I'm at Unitas Capital, where we're launching UC Empower Fund. It's a growth stage equity fund for impact businesses, and financial services is one of the sectors we will invest in. Having seen the evolution of credit and non-credit over the years, what we're really excited about today is the drivers of digital adoption in the recent past. And therefore, we are very closely looking at non-credit opportunities encompassing insurance, wealth and investments for underserved segments. Happy to talk about this more as we go along. Thank you.
Thanks, Mona. Amol, if you would like to.
Sure. Thanks, Jyotsna, and glad to be a part of this panel. By way of introduction, my name is Amol Varangi. I lead investments in the financial services space at Omidyar Network India. Omidyar Network India is an impact investment firm. We have a dual checkbook model where we do equity or commercial VC investing through the equity book, and we also have a grant book where we work very closely with the regulators and with the government to solve important societal problems. As far as the VC investing is concerned, our mission is to back bold entrepreneurs who are trying to create a meaningful life for every Indian. Coming to the subject at hand, what models have evolved beyond credit? Frankly, there are lots. To name a few, payments plus MSME or automation tech, insurtech, wealth tech, neobanks. New verticals would be financial infrastructure plays, agri fintech. And frankly, these are not new. If you look at the capital that has been absorbed, let's say from seed to Series D, beyond Series D is not a fair comparison because credit businesses will obviously absorb capital as it's the raw material. But if you take the seed to Series D, roughly anywhere from $1.5 to $2 billion, which flows into the financial services segment, around a third to 45% is credit, both consumer as MSME. Around 25% odd is payments plus MSME. Then you have insurtech, which is 15-20%. You have wealth tech, which is another 10-15%. And then there are other verticals which emerge, right? So capital has been flowing in these sectors for a few years now. Which are the ones that I am excited about? Frankly, all the ones which I mentioned. But if I were to pick two, I would say financial infrastructure plays, and I would say payments plus or payments plus MSME tech seem very interesting. On the financial infrastructure play, what I mean by that is B2B businesses which work with banks, fintechs, or anybody else who wants to provide a financial product or a service. And these could range anywhere from customer onboarding, assessment, collections tech, clearing, settlements, and so on. Right. And the reason why I find this interesting is with the broad truth as we see it, where the consumer has moved digital, the providers will also move digital, and they will need help in terms of building these capabilities. Right, a bank will build its own digital front to cater to these new customers, but will also need help from nimble tech-first firms. Right. Similarly, if we think at ONI that embedded finance will be a big theme going forward, that financial products will be embedded into customer journeys in their normal lives. And then the issuers or the originators of these financial products will be very different from the erstwhile originators we have seen. These folks will not have the financial product technical know-how, but will have fantastic user engagement, customer UI, UX, and so on. So even there, they would need support in terms of reconciliations, ability to hit the market running, and so on, right? Which is what makes the financial infrastructure play very exciting to us. The second bucket which I mentioned was payments plus, which is payments plus MSME tech, stroke automation. Again, why am I excited? 2-3 reasons. So one, as we know, business has moved omni-channel, right? Today, any merchant does business from various channels, right? From customers walking in to WhatsApp to web online, so on and so forth. And this has moved obviously because of the first premise which we laid, which is customer has moved online, right? Second, business processes have turned digital and tech oriented. For example, right from procurement to sales to logistics, everything is available through these digital platforms to these small merchants, right? And of course, there's the payments line, which is always needed to fulfill any commercial transaction. Now, there's a need to bring all this together for a small businessman, right? He can't have 5 different things. There's a need to make sense of all this. And this applies, I mean, it obviously applies to offline businesses, but it even applies to online businesses if you think hard. I mean, if you look at the way D2C brands are emerging, how can these D2C brands match an Amazon-like experience for a user, right? What kind of services would help them provide that. So I would classify all these in this payments plus automation. And these are the two segments that I think are of special interest to us. Let me pause here and hand it back over to you, Jules.
Thanks, Amol. You may well have summarized the panel in your intro, but we'll try and double click as we go through. Just a quick question out of curiosity, is this space of interest out of both the pockets? You mentioned there's a dual checkbook strategy. Is from an Omidyar standpoint, is that how it's approached right now in terms of interest levels?
Absolutely. When it comes to building market infrastructure, we are very much open to non-profit plays or public architecture.
Understood. Maybe a good topic to also double click on as we go along. Chirant, maybe if you could go next and talk through your background and what prompted you to set up Riskovery as well.
Sure. So first of all, thanks, Jyotsna, and the broader team here. Pleasure to be here representing Riskovery. So I'll talk a little bit about the company before diving into sort of the founder background and our motivations to start this company. So Riskovery is a Mumbai and Bangalore-based insurtech company. We are an insurance in a box. So think what payment gateways and process did to the payments industry and to help any digital merchant to accept payments by being that one-stop shop service that cuts across payment instruments and issuers at the back end. We are doing the same thing for insurance distribution. So it's a full stack distribution service powered by technology and APIs to help any company to offer any kind of an insurance product to its customer base across any insurance company and distribution channel. So that is what we mean by insurance in a box. It's fundamentally composed of 3 building blocks. One is the insurance product itself. We are not an underwriter or an insurance company. We sit between large-scale distribution and the underwriting community and provide the middleware service right in the middle with an infrastructure approach. So the first building block is the insurance product itself. So for us, an insurance product is an API. We connect with 30 insurance companies across 75 plus insurance products at this time, and that number keeps on growing by the week. From that sense, we are an API provider for the insurance product. The second building block is the technology or the SaaS, which enables any distributor, whether it's a mainstream distributor like a bank or a broker, or an alternate distributor like an e-commerce company, retail company, ad tech company, digital company, or anyone for that matter, to manage the process end to end from a B2B2C perspective, right? So enabling in terms of distribution, helping in terms of payments, claims, management of insurance policies, all happens via a white labeled software that is deployed with a SaaS model. That is the second building block. The third building block is our license itself. We are a licensed intermediary in India, and in certain places where we have seen opportunities where especially on the alternative distribution segment, where insurance distributors are new to insurance distribution, they need help from a compliance support perspective as well, where our license comes and bridges some of the the gaps that they would otherwise had to have due to mandates from our insurance regulator, IRDA. To fill in those gaps, our license comes in. Right. So from that perspective, almost think of it as a license as a service, but it is not exactly license as a service, because those are sort of, fairly compliance heavy components. So what we do is an abridged version of that, which is mandated using a POSP model and whatnot. So to abstract ourselves away from all the complexities, basically think of us as a one-stop shop for anyone to do any insurance distribution, right?
So we may have lost Chirant, right? Maybe we'll just give him a few seconds to see if we get him back. So maybe we will embrace the technical snag and come back to Chirant. Utpal, do you want to just go ahead and maybe talk through your answer? Oh, sorry, Chirant, we lost you for about 30 to 45 seconds.
Oh.
So the headline you were talking about, in summary, that you were effectively a partner for anyone who wants to distribute insurance, and effectively was solving for that distribution and everything along the way, right?
Yeah. So sorry, just to continue from that, apologies. So Essentially, we are the fastest growing startup in this particular space with this infrastructure play. The space technically is called InsurTech infrastructure. It is a new space. It's a new approach to insurance distribution. It would be fair to say that we are probably the category creators of this particular space in India, and we are on the journey to kind of lead this category. And very excited about the future. Insurance is in its very nascent times in India. We are literally 2% of the global market size, but going 5 times the rate. Literally 50% of the penetration, insurance penetration rate, and have a long way to go, right? So we all these sort of macro enablers make us think that we are literally a day zero startup in a day one kind of an industry, and a long way to go for all of us to kind of try and bridge that penetration gap. And that's what the mission of the company is really about. And in terms of us as a founding team, 4 of us, 2 of us came within the industry, 2 of us came outside the industry. But the exciting part about it was we are all excited about the ecosystem and what it means to help drive the penetration rate of insurance in India with a distribution mindset, because we wanted to kind of think about it from an asset light, capital efficient perspective from day zero. And we pivoted along the way. We thought that initially it was more of a policy bazaar for MSMEs kind of a use case that we were tackling, and then along the way we realized that, hey, why can't we just, instead of being a brand, why can't we be the force behind any brand, right? Let's take our completely what we have built in terms of tech stack and reposition it for anybody to leverage it. So why do we have to kind of solve for insurance distribution or penetration by becoming a brand? Maybe what all we need to do is get the right levers in place and enable anybody to distribute insurance anywhere, right? So that is how sort of the thesis emerged about 2.5, 3 years ago. And it's been an exciting ride, and sort of looking forward to what kind of comes along.
Okay, thanks, Sridhar. We'll come back to you with lots of questions on the market opportunity that you discovered as you took this plunge. Utpal,
Sure.
maybe moving on to you. You're with a long history at ICICI that did some pioneering work in the context of rural distribution. I'm just curious what prompted you with your entrepreneurial journey and what your thesis is.
Okay.
So your background, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on this panel. Very difficult company to keep, actually, but I'll try my best. As Jyotsna said, I'm a rural manager by training, and spent about 18 years at a very large private sector bank, most of that in rural. And we started off rural business when we didn't really have the current infrastructure that you see in rural, either in terms of quality of digital infrastructure, and digital was by and large. These are times that Mona spoke about when Citibank had already put out its first purely digital product. Through various structures, 18, 20 years in rural finance, we learned a lot of things, especially on what works and what does not work, various channels, physical, very large balance sheet sizes, population level.
Utpal, you're fading a little bit towards the end of your sentences, maybe where your mic is positioned. Yeah.
Does this work better, Jyotsna?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So I was saying that, a very large scale intervention across the length and breadth of the country, various channel structures, product structures, so on and so forth, and across both what is normally called as the asset side of business as well as liability side of the business, etc. And having, spent a lot of time there, we realized that overall there seems to be some bit of confusion around what rural market actually is. At many places, it gets equated to agriculture, and then you say that agriculture has a declining share in our overall GDP. Therefore, rural seems to be a dying sector. People are running away from villages to towns to clean tables, and therefore, that population structure is unstable, so on and so forth. Or, rural is poor, this, that, and the other. And on one hand, you see this entire confusion about the economy of rural India as a whole. And on the other hand, you also see large gaps in the way this whole market is being serviced. So either you have very, very product-centric approaches, or you have very channel-centric approaches, or you have very, subsidy-linked, approaches, so on and so forth. And then we realized that, such a large market with, per capita income levels now being around $1,200 to $1,500, and at a household size, that multiplies itself by 5.5. If you cut this pyramid, you really get a very large size, and in our estimate, that is about 100 million households, which is, in some sense, ready to absorb growth capital and initiatives, not just beyond credit. While we always talk about credit plus plus, we also saw a whole need for finance plus plus, because of the synergy that exists between finance and, non-financial interventions for these houses. And we saw huge, gaps between the way distribution operates in this entire geography. A pin code level analysis, for example, and take only secondary data that you trust, will show you that the penetration ratios between a semi-urban town and a village 5 kilometers away from that town, they vary by an order of magnitude of 5 to 10. And that's the kind of, opportunity that, creates itself. In fact, if you remember, when financial inclusion as a concept was started off by Government of India, etc., they said 4 things. They said credit, they said insurance, they said payments, and they said payments. All 4 of these put together. Unfortunately, what happened, over the next 10, 15 years is that your channels became distributed for each one of these products. So bank branches and NBFC branches became the main source for credit. Business correspondents became the main source for savings. Similarly, merchants and, kirana shops, shared channels became the main source for payments, so on and so forth. And insurance, of course, as Chirag said, continued to be completely underserved in this entire market. And that has led to a huge distortion in the whole, product economics, so to say, or the way we think about servicing this entire market. And that's where, we thought of coming out with a design that focuses not on products, not on individuals, but takes a 360-degree view of the household as a whole. And actually, these rural households are a full microcosm of the rural economy as a whole, which, by the way, is just 1/3 agriculture. And these are all national income statistics. I'm not giving you, my own figures in any way. 2/3 of rural GDP of the country comes from manufacturing and services. Now, these households are these consolidated, complex households where you have crops, you have animal husbandry, you have, wage, you have salary, etc., all these coming. And nobody is really designing for an all-inclusive services proposition for this household. And that is where Sarvgram was born about 2.5 years ago. And we went in with a hypothesis that a household-led, data-oriented approach to this entire segment will create a lot of orbit-changing opportunities for the aspiring rural households. That is what we are trying to, set up. In some sense, we manufacture our own products, we distribute them. We are also, partnering with people who have an interest in these markets, whether they be lenders, they be insurers, or they be non-financial services providers. So on. We also, thought through very hard on this entire issue of digital interventions. And we realized that leading with only digital is going to be slightly, tricky in this market. All sorts of data will point to you. They are not media dark. They're consuming huge amounts of data, smartphone penetration, this, that, and the other. But, if you really want to design for overall proposition, whether it is sourcing, whether it is fulfillment, whether servicing, or, continued relationship management, then you will have to go in with what we call a high-touch, high-tech architecture. You will have to lead with probably a relationship manager and then enable her or him with very strong tech capabilities to be able to manage those relationships well. Because, it's not just about distribution. It is also about mitigation of risk. It is also about control. because ultimately sustainability is going to come from the return that you're able to give. People like Mona and Amol, and of course you, Joseph. And therefore, we had to really think very hard on the overall design, coming to a conclusion that leading with either you could lead with a tech first play or you could lead with a physical play, but then ultimately both of them will have to merge to be able to make a meaningful. We don't think products at all. We don't, take a blinkered view, not even across consumption and so-called income generation products. We think household, and we think about the surplus that this household is creating or can create, given the interventions that Sarvgram is bringing in. We don't only think about lending at all. In fact, as I said, we don't think about finance only, because there is a huge interplay between a physical investment on the ground and what it does to the capability of the house. And therefore, our channels, our entire tech architecture, everything is focused on ensuring that we onboard these customers with as less friction as possible, and we service them throughout with as little risk. That's where Sarvgram.
Thanks, Utpal. As you can see, there are 4 very interesting backgrounds, very interesting biases, and which also translate to perspectives on how we're going to approach this discussion. Maybe I'm going to start with you, Amol. Amol, you have the most macro view amongst the group, given your long history in investment banking, investing, etc. It will be great if you can paint a picture of the opportunity. First, maybe if you can share. You named a range of spaces. To your mind, what are the larger spaces within these? Like, is there a top 3? Are there numbers associated to how big you see these markets? Or in whichever way you want to talk through the relativity of the opportunities you see outside of lending. And secondly, just to paint a customer level picture, you refer to an interesting point on bringing the proposition together for a customer when it comes to bringing these things together, and where even out there is an opportunity. It will be great if you can use an example maybe on that front and share.
So of the verticals I mentioned, let me not pick verticals basis what I find attractive. I'll probably leave InsurTech and Agri FinTech out, given we have the experts to really talk of that. Let me talk on, let's say, 2 other buckets that I spoke about, right? So let's talk about wealth tech or savings, and try to put as to how big is the opportunity, at least how we see it, right? We know from data which is being thrown around the growth which this industry has seen. But if you look at actually so first, what is financial investments as a percentage of total investment or wealth of a household? And again, there are various statistics out there. RBI had done a massive household finance committee research towards end 2017-18. And the number that an average household threw up as financial assets was around 5%. 80% odd was real estate. Then there were other assets, livestock, motors, XYZ. Of course, this is the average household, which would be skewed because of the large urban, large rural segmentation, but the numbers would not be that different, right? But even if we take to the sliver of financial assets, around 65% of that are still bank FDs and cash. The balance are insurance and other products, right? So in terms of just getting the headroom available is huge. Even if we don't track any Western trends, the opportunity size is pretty big. If we look at the numbers which we have seen in the past 1 year, especially post-COVID, if you look at any of the top 3 platforms, let's say a Zerodha or a Grow, they talk of around 8 million actives, monthly actives, right? And total installed base of around 20 million. If you talk of total numbers, then we are talking of roughly 70 million Demat accounts and crypto, so surprisingly, like 40 million already in the past 3 years. Right? I mean, leave that segment aside. So the awareness, the customer activation has all been done, right? It's a question of really how do you increase the allocation now towards more financial assets, and within more financial assets, what are the different asset classes which can come in there? We do note that a large part of the market is still agent driven. Roughly, there are, I think, some 250,000 agents. Of them active would be probably 100,000, 150,000, right? Just an opportunity to digitize and what Utpal mentioned, bring that tech plus touch model itself could really unleash a greater flow into the financial assets. So that's how I would look at the wealth tech or the savings segment. The second bit was the financial infra segment that I spoke about earlier. Here, I think the easiest way to think of opportunity is what could be the throughput through a platform. If you look at global markets, and there are enough examples of these kind of models, there's a Marqeta, there's a Galileo in the US, there's a Tink in Europe. The opportunity size is generally measured by a throughput, and your revenues are as a percentage of the throughput. So for a Marqeta, there's roughly $100 billion being processed annually through its platform, and they would make around 40 to 50 basis points. So that's a good $500 million revenue company for you right there, right? Coming to India, how will this change? And what could be the volumes there here? If we just look at cards, we know the numbers again, 60 million, $100 billion annual spend. If we take that growth to be 5x, just on this one credit-linked business, there is enough settlement, reconciliation, XYZ opportunities, interchange opportunities where you make this 40, 50 basis points. So these are the two ways how we would look to size the opportunities. One of the difficulties here is the use cases are still emerging. There is API banking, there is opening all your banking services digitally, where the monetization is still to settle down. But then that's a leap of faith which an investor has to take. So difficult to monetize, but yes, we look at US, we look at what is the kind of throughput and draw some comparable here. To your last point on how can a product bring everything together for a merchant, I've been trying to think of an example where things are very fragmented. Let's say a small MSME retailer today, right, where he has the core banking, obviously with a bank, the current account and all the other stuff. For payments, he probably has a Mosambik or a Pine Lab. Everyone has probably two on an average, right? Then for an invoicing and inventory, they probably would use a Khata book or an OK Credit or a Vyapar. Then for a procurement, there are numerous platforms coming in, but there would be either an Udaan or a Jumbotail or something of that kind, right? Similarly, on the logistics, if they do provide any kind of delivery for omnichannel businesses, there are a bunch of logistics partners in there, right? And it's very difficult for this merchant to have these 6 vendors. It might still happen for larger, maybe not a big box, but even let's say larger high value merchants. But as you go smaller, really they don't have bandwidth to do that. The question here is then who is best placed to really consolidate and provide this within the same platform. We feel banks will up their game here, given there is a feeling that the Paytms and the BharatPays of the world really did a lot on the merchant acquisition side, but the merchant's trust still remains with the bank, right? So we feel banks will up their game in really providing this host of services, which they might not build completely in-house, but will partner with folks to really embed this within their own terminals or POS software.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't help that they're all offered these free of cost, right? So there is no bar or threshold, and it's 5 platforms too many for a small merchant. Agreed. Interesting. Chirant, maybe if you could briefly deep dive into the insurance opportunity itself, and specifically if you could highlight the opportunity across, as they say, the Bharat as against the India, the deeper you go, what do you see, especially vis-a-vis other markets that you may have looked at as you thought of launching insurance? Some headlines on that front.
Yeah, it's a great question. And the way we think about it is that, look, if you look at the macros, and I spoke a little bit about the macros earlier, but just to kind of quickly recap, India is a drop in the ocean as far as insurance from a market sizing perspective is concerned. We are literally less than less than 2% of the global market size, but we are growing at 5 times the rate. We are, I mean, when I say we, the industry, by and large, it's 2x India's GDP consistently over the last few years now. But we are between 50 and 60% of the insurance penetration rate, right? So basically, what we mean by that insurance penetration rate is it is a equation of the total premium collected or premium that is the risk pool that is attached in a given industry via the premium divided by the GDP of the nation. So basically that we are essentially about 50% of the global median, right? Which means that we are about 50% of the rest of the world. And this is the second most populous country you're talking about, right? So all these things put together, if you ask us, it creates almost a perfect storm in terms of growth market for insurance. So the bottom line is, look, if you believe in India, you got to believe in insurance in India. And what does that mean? So that means that there is opportunities everywhere as far as insurance distribution is concerned, and there is that multiple risks need to be covered for our country to thrive. Not just sort of in urban markets, but to your point, in our rural and Bharat markets as well, right? And of course, there is a nomenclature of how you look at Bharat, India 1, India 2, India 3, and sort of, let's not go into that. Let's just look at the underserved, underpenetrated population for insurance as a whole, right? We think fundamentally the problems to solve in Bharat is a trust problem, right? A trust problem typically means that a solution needs to solve from multiple perspectives, right? It's an ecosystem problem, so it's going to be an ecosystem solution. So for us, the Bharat equation, and this is where we get a little bit of our geek on, so please bear with us, 3AE, right? It is access, affordability, awareness, and experience. All these 3 things, 3+1, 4 things are the reasons why we are severely underpenetrated as far as insurance is concerned, especially in our Bharat markets, right? People don't understand it well, they can't access it, they can't afford it. And then even if you've adopted it, you've had a bad experience, which stops you from utilizing other products and services as they come along. So these are very broad, problem statements, right? And we think that again, a solution for something like this needs to be multi-tier, long-term, needs to have intricate views, but needs to, from a bottoms-up perspective, but from a top-down perspective, needs to have a very long view in terms of how to solve for these problems. So we built out a model just out of curiosity between us as the founding team to say that, hey, what if we were to think about India bridging its penetration gap from 4.1% where it stands right now to the global penetration rate of insurance penetration rate of 7.2%, and what if that were to happen, say, in this decade itself, right? So we did obviously a lot of assumptions go into a model like that, and what came out is, if we end up doing that in 2030, we are going to look at a market that is going to be 5 times the size that it is right now. And most interestingly, a growth of about 10 times the number of people that are covered right now in terms of insurance, right? So that's very heartening by itself. But the question is how, right? And the framework that we have used is, in startup, paradigm, there is this product market fit as a concept, right? So what if insurance was a product and Bharat was the market? How would we solve for that, right? for us, it is insurance by definition is a very concentrated sort of financial service, in the sense that people tend to bulk up a lot on certain risks, and the long tail you kind of leave it, right? So so for us, it was all about ensuring the right product for the right kind of a customer at the right time. That equation has to be kosher. And in a way, it comes down to a product channel fit, right? So if you were to look at, again, specifically focusing on Bharat, there are three sets of products for the Bharat market, right? By definition of how to categorize them in terms of fairly definitive buckets. One is the mandatory products like the motor insurance and whatnot, which applies to most of the all of the country as well. But these are mandatory products. Second set is the new products, right? Sachetized products that can be catered particularly for a certain demographic at a certain price point, etc. These are your large products broken down into micro pieces in terms of risks and all of that, and distributed into the Bharat communities, if you will. Third is subsidized products. Products that are subsidized by the government, for example, like health programs, Ayushman Bharat, or for that matter, crop insurance, so on and so forth, right? So that is, say, that you plot on one side. The other side you plot is the distribution channels, right? Now, the interesting bit is there are existing distribution channels which the government had adopted and or have been around for a long time, agent driven, so on and so forth. But there are new distribution channels opening up as well, and Amol's pointed to some of them, right? Where new interesting business models are being created for the Bharat market. And for the SME community in particular, and interesting sort of value propositions are being created in that at that intersection of say Bharat meets SME meets sort of a consumer sort of ecosystems, right? And why can't these platforms be leveraged to distribute insurance? So these new distribution channels and alternate distribution channels are also emerging. So when we plot this 3x2 matrix, if you will, and that is your solution set to kind of sort of solve for. You solve for it with a combination of 4 or 5 things, right? Typically you solve for it with data, technology, regulations, capital, talent, right? These are your 4 or 5 levers to solve for those spaces, and that is our equation. That's how we think about the how to solve for Bharat. The if and the why, and it is a given, right? The how is the crux, and the so what and the when is what the how will sort of show us. That is our overarching view in terms of how we think about this entire space. And just to take an example, right? Just to take an example, I mean, I think it's a little bit more theoretical what I just explained, and sort of, like I said, we're trying to get a geek on. But if just to take an example, let's look at the intersection of, say, an existing channel for a mandatory product, right? Most, say, a two-wheeler or a tractor insurance or a four-wheeler insurance are mandatory in India, but say new channels meets an existing product. A new channel would be, say, someone like, say, a business correspondent or a banking correspondent. In most cases, right, most BCs in India are not enabled to distribute insurance. They are mostly for domestic remittances, some credit applications, so on and so forth. What if we were to leverage that market to enable them with insurance distribution as well? Right, so we did that. We did that with sort of a few partners, and there's an ongoing journey to kind of enable them to sell more, derive more throughput, etc. But it's an interesting use case, because at the end of the day, these are existing channel already set up in our Bharat markets, and now you're empowering them to also distribute insurance. So it's a great use
case. It's actually an interesting segue into the point on partnerships on channel. And Mona, coming from a long history working with a lot of lending-oriented distribution channels that have probably most successfully established the unit economics of scale, of distribution, of profitability, etc. I think we've all seen that insurance has probably been the lowest hanging fruit, which has latched on to the credit and lending adjacencies. I'm curious what made insurance the most easily lapped up adjacency, and what are the opportunities? I mean, what's been your experience looking at insurance getting bundled with credit, and beyond that, what's your experience on the whole topic of alternate channels and what they have potential to distribute beyond lending?
So, as far as lending organizations are concerned, NBFCs or banks, you're right. I mean, insurance has been the most successfully cross-sold, if we want to use the cross. It was actually bundled, but really, let's say, cross-sold product. The incentives are also well aligned, you see, and I think we saw it happen in an analog world where there was no digital at all. But I think it will probably get better traction now as models such as Discovery, etc., really gain traction. And I know that banks and institutions on the lending side that the Discovery team is in touch with, or others in that set are in touch with. They are excited about it. I just want to take a short step back to answer your question, maybe a little bit more broadly, Jyotsna. So what's a low-hanging fruit for the fintech community within the lending community? I think it's a good idea to look at the principles that are driving these conversations. I mean, pretty much every lending institution, irrespective of size, is alive and open to this opportunity of partnering with fintechs. I mean, some have had a head start, but everybody is getting there. So to understand what's going on in their minds, what will get traction, it's a good idea to see it from the bank or the lending institution's perspective. Clearly, the conversations have been driven by what will help me accelerate customer acquisition and do so digitally. They all have their physical touch points, etc. But the digital opportunity is something that they're looking to fintechs for, helping them accelerate and really accelerate customer acquisition. I think that's the first point. And I'm staying away from the whole lending fintech because that's not the subject of this discussion, and there are other drivers there. And there are a variety, even though every lending company that Chirant or wherever Utpal needs to partner, or the savings-led fintech platforms need to partner, they'll all have a variety of approaches within what kind of customers they want to acquire. Some will be looking for an expansion of product set, and some will look for a deeper penetration of their existing customer bases. So I think what the banks realize, and maybe not talk about it as often, but just in the recent past, they realize that this open banking is coming. And, apart from the obvious thing that there is huge digital adoption, so you want to be part of that. And you want somebody to kind of help you accelerate your own digital sort of processes. But also that open banking is coming. We can't be sure exactly when it takes off, but the fact that you're sitting on someone's financial or transactional data is not a good enough moat anymore. And you have to now compete on product and service and customer experience. And fintechs have the potential to help you out on that. I guess there is some level of caution on data security and what kind of regulation will come and sort of clear the pitch on this. And of course, when you're thinking about who to partner with, that fintech stability and viability will be a question, because there's also a limit to how many partnerships a lending institution or any institution can have. So while you'll have hundreds of meetings, etc., you'll select a few and you'll keep a few in reserve, but there'll be a limit to how many partnerships you'll strike. So from a fintech's perspective, what kind of partners should you look out for? Assuming that these are the things that are going on in their minds. They're looking for customer acquisition, they're looking for data security, they have an eye on how the regulation is changing, etc. But the fact also is, and people would have on this panel would have experienced that these are very lengthy conversations. For a fintech to get a partnership going with a bank or an NBFC, it just takes a very, very long time. So you want to first pick that segment of the market that is at least nimble and wanting to be nimble and putting its efforts in getting there. And so my guess is, the NBFCs or the mid-sized banks would be a better sort of low-hanging fruit, to answer your question a little bit more pointedly, among the largest set of financial institutions out there. And I guess they'll be looking much more for deepening their market presence, this set of players, than necessarily expanding products. And really looking for leapfrogging on their tech capabilities. So wherever you have the confluence of these 2-3 things is where you'll probably get. Sorry, I didn't specifically answer your question on the insurance piece. I would think among—
That's fine. I think, yeah, insurance is probably what everyone's witnessed in terms of bundling. I think partly the question was beyond insurance, what helps, because it's clear from the conversations that at some level, it is useful not to recreate the distribution that lending organizations have already created. Historically, I guess some of the challenges have been around the DNA of these lending organizations, which you're also alluding to in terms of who could be low-hanging fruit in terms of partners. And there we're referring to organizations that have attempted building a DNA that can think beyond lending, that can be more nimble on their feet when it comes to a broader offering to the end customer, et cetera, right? So yeah, I mean, no worries on the insurance piece. I think it's a broader topic, and maybe there will be a time when there are standalone business models and standalone distributions that can go completely digital to the end customer, but partly moving over maybe to Utpal, given that you are building the distribution into rural markets and you're far more product agnostic and are willing to go the whole way in terms of catering to whatever the households are looking at. I'm curious, how would you define the opportunity in terms of what a household is really looking to consume, right? What does that look like when you go in and sit with these not so familiar consumers of India and not fully digitally covered presence, right? What does it look like? What does the pie look like?
Those conversations are very, very interesting, Jyotsna, and so far removed from what we commonly understand as products. And I'm not just talking about within lending. So this household that you are sitting and talking to, and you're talking about insurance, for example, and realize that they quote a story where the son fell off a tree and broke his leg, and they had to dip into their savings to get the whole medical bills paid. So what is the product that the household is consuming? Insurance or credit, for that matter? Or you don't have one good monsoon and they have to dip into their wealth to make good their livelihood level sustenance. So what is the product that they're consuming? Again, is it crop insurance, weather insurance, or is it well? So this entire interplay of products in our target households is something that fascinates us a huge lot. And therefore we think of products essentially only from one point of view, which is what is the minimum resilient surplus that this household generates on a given frequency, okay? And then this surplus, when used as an EMI, actually becomes a loan. When used as a premium, actually becomes an insurance. When used as a recurring deposit, actually becomes a wealth management product, a deposit. When used for down payment, becomes actually an asset creating product. So that is the level of interplay that we are seeing. And therefore we stop thinking in terms of, the traditional sense of product.
Maybe if I were to, yeah, sorry, in that context, if you were to also share, like, what is the appetite of these households? Because clearly large institutions haven't offered a lot so far.
Yep.
And so what are they hungry for effectively with that resilient surplus that you referred to?
We are blessed to be in India, and any which way you size this market, you're going to get numbers similar to what Chirag said, that you're looking at benchmarks which are maybe 100 times of what you are right now. Just the way we look at our markets, this is 150 million households that we're talking about. Take the pyramid, bottom 30-35%, by whichever definition. You take the below poverty line definition, you take the less than $2 per day consumption, the World Bank line, whichever way you take it, about 30-35% are going to be at a subsistence. They are going to have a very different, product requirement. Whether it is subsidy-led, or it is welfare-led, or it is, group structures, joint liability structures, bundled insurance products, or Jan Dhan account, zero balance account, so on and so forth. Then you have the top 10-15% who are, richer than most of the people, on this panel. I mean, they are, absolutely well taken care of. I mean, they are way more prosperous. Then there is this entire 50-60%, which in a sense is the middle class. And in our markets, Jyotsna, we are now seeing this middle class at a similar level of aspiration as urban India was in the early 2000s, which is when the whole, consumer finance revolution, housing revolution, cards, payments, etc., happened there. That is what we are seeing, here today. And in urban India, in 2000s, early 2000s, we didn't really see one sector growing versus the other, right? We didn't see credit cards and consumption credit going, but housing credit not growing as much. I mean, all of them were similar. The new private sector banks that came in for the wealth management products, that is when the mutual funds also went, through the roof, etc. And of course, because of what happened in housing and construction, the whole allied impact on logistics, on manufacturing happened. And that is what we are seeing here. So we don't really worry about sizing the market at all. It's a $1.5 trillion economy, rural market in today's numbers. That is bigger than Russia. If you are just whole of Russia, actually, if you're taking a comparison in that. Number of households wise, penetration of products, I think Amol, and Chirant have touched upon that. Whichever study you take 5%, 7%, if you're going from 5 to 10%, the base numbers get multiplied by 10. We don't worry about size at all. What we worry about is the design that will do justice to this size. You can take some of these existing products and downsize them, strip them down to their bare essentials and say that, okay, these are the products for rural. But our learning has been that, given the paying capacity and given the aspirations of these markets, you don't really need to worry about stripping down anything. The latest models of mobile phones and television sets sell at MRP in these markets, as compared to 2 models older, which normally is being pushed into these markets because they're rural so far. There you talk about discount. So I'm just not worried about size and everything at all. I'm worried about what will get the real value delivered to these households, and what will they be, in a sense, how will you benefit from this interaction of financial and non-financial. The infrastructure that we are helping farmers create, for example, is helping them, irrigate better, and therefore, hopefully, we'll get to know over 3-5 years, their household incomes kind of becoming more resilient. So it's essentially one composite complex balance sheet that you are really working. A lot of discussion on MSC, for example, in this. But MSC is just one one part of this entire composite balance sheet. The same household also is cultivating some land or is rearing some milch animals. You can take a blinkered view, which says that, this is a business loan come, financial accounting kind of a solution. Or you could take all of it into your stream and say that, okay, members of the same household are also borrowers from, a couple of microfinance institutions. And they're not really all doing goat rearing, right? I mean, that money has come into the enterprises. And that's where the income is kind of going to repay them. That is where, an impact on health of the chief wage earner, or for that matter, other members of the house, is really impacting. So what consumes us is this various kinds of solutions that we need to create for various parts of this.
Effectively, you're saying there is enough money that secures the revenues of all the future businesses that are being built into this segment, and it's only left to the folks like you to build out these businesses as against for the customers to be ready with their wallets, right? Effectively,
you have
there
to
is a
understand
appetite and demand.
The only breaking point in that story is the recognition of risks. in this market. And that is something that you have to really, take into account. For example, if I were in Chirant's business, I would worry more about persistency than anything else. If I'm distributing life products, for example, the DIP, the tractor insurance that, he spoke about, they're only insured for the first year because it is mandated. Second year onwards, gone, finished. So if you make your economics on the basis of X percentage of tractors are not insured and therefore they will get insured, you will not find that. That's the kind of.
Understood. It's interesting. So picking up from what you've mentioned, Utpal, and what Chirant has been talking about, maybe I'll move over to both Amol and Mona for two specific areas to be covered. For one, it's very clear that all this while, I don't know at what point the end customer has been ready to consume these products, but it's evident that the businesses have not historically been ready to reach these customers, either for the lack of technology and where technology could have evolved into, or for the want of partner institutions, right? So maybe focusing on these two topics, Amol, if you could come in on the tech dimension, what do you see changing, which is now going to make it possible to tap into this demand, which has clearly existed for a while, and I dare say it is pent-up demand to some extent for products beyond lending? What role, where does technology stand today, both in terms of what its capability is and in terms of how ready end customers are to tap into this technology?
So on the customer end, we know through varying degrees of digital savviness, but large number of customers are mobile in some shape and form. Their consumption journeys or where they are on that cycle could differ. Right, an urban young millennial would be right up there, whereas somebody else would be somewhere lower on the spectrum in terms of consumption of use cases. But we do know that the customer is mobile. What has changed and why is it happening now? I think 3-4 broad reasons. So one is the technology which has led to product availability. The examples of that could be, let's say, on the savings tech or tech side, we have ETF now, which are really zero cost funds, which can be created on the fly and really distributed to customers, right? If you were to extend that argument to, let's say, the remittances market, there is DeFi, which we know as a technology is clearly suited to this market. And presently, remittance markets have roughly 7% spread, right? Yeah. So it's ripe up there for the taking. So I think the technology has now come up, which allows these products to be cheaper. So that's point number one. Point number two, I would say the distribution models have changed, at least in the urban areas to a certain extent. Rural is still tech and touch. And again, if you draw that across the two worlds, in the earlier world where you had to go through an intermediary, and for any financial product, if I think of it, the distribution commissions range from, let's say, 30-40 basis points for a housing loan to 15% for an insurance, right? And everything in between for different kinds of financial products. Move that to an embedded finance or a direct-to-consumer business model. Again, taking Utpal's point fairly well, might be suited for urban customers, which are also a large number. And then suddenly there is this entire 25 basis points of a high ticket item to 15% to play with, which is where models like Discovery come into picture. Even there, if you are a D2C customer, we have seen customer acquisition range anywhere from $20 to really tough products being a couple of thousands. But if you are an embedded finance play, which is where somebody like Chirant operates, you already have these millions of customers on your platform doing something. And it's a question of embedding the right contextual product at literally very minimal CAC, right? So first was a technology point, which is now enabled. Second was the distribution model, which is changing. Even in the rural areas, you can have the tech-assisted touch point a lot more productive and a lot more cheaper as compared to the earlier way of operating, which will still allow delivery. The third point I would say is the API economy, which Mona alluded to. Like it or not, it's coming. And different regions have seen different driving factors, right? In Europe, it was more mandated by the regulators that you have to do open banking. and banks and other licensed intermediaries have to share if asked for by any other business organization. In the US, it's largely been driven by commercial forces. Models have emerged, fintechs have gone and really captured those underserved customers with use cases, and then banks have jumped on the bandwagon and really partnered with them on that. In India, we are putting customer at the center, and a lot of public infrastructure is around it, whether be it the AA, the account aggregator, or UPI. But all this are open architectures, right? So pulling any service, getting more information about the customer, completing his journey, or at least your internal journey of the process today is a lot more quicker, cheaper, and simpler in the API world than it was earlier, right? So that's point number 3. I think the last point, which is yet to evolve fully, is on the monetization part, and which is the crux really. Outside of credit, will the customers pay for anything else? I think from our experience globally, there are different drivers. In the US, interchange plays a huge role in just moving money, even in a prepaid form, or let's say early settlement of anything, given the way their wage system operates, plays a huge role, which business models have exploited to really build large businesses. In Europe, cross-border movement of money is a big use case, given people work across the continent and there's a lot of money flow. So a lot of these models emerge tapping that as one of the use cases where cross-border movement of money leaves money on the table for you to build businesses around it. In India, not so clear yet, but 2-3 broad points. I think volumes will drive credit volumes will drive revenues as opposed to a credit product where obviously on each ticket you make a substantial revenue, especially across tenor and ticket sizes. But here, and API banking will enable those volumes. Second, we feel merchants will be willing to foot some part of the bill. See, even in credit, where a zero-cost EMI to a customer is really, the customer is not paying for it, right? It's the merchant who is paying from his distribution margins. I see no reason why that cannot apply to financial products if there is enough throughput. Hopefully, I've addressed your question.
Yeah, and I would probably throw in the fact that there's clearly enough investment capital that is flowing in to give these models some time. Anything which is tech-based distribution is seeing a lot of capital flows. And there is patience and risk appetite to wait for the monetization and the profitability to emerge, right? Something that was probably not as common if we were to look back a few years. Clearly, that's something that has the potential to contribute to the pace at which all of this moves. Moving to Mona, clearly, while there are phenomenal lending institutions that have successfully built distribution into customer segments, my big question is, how do you align incentives for these existing organizations to distribute other products and services? In your experience, what are the drivers?
Well, like I said earlier, the drivers are, all these institutions, when it's a bank, it's also not just a lending institution, but NBFC is just that. They have huge ambitions to grow into areas which are untapped. I mean, the India opportunity, frankly, most have only just scratched the surface, and the incumbents, as I like to call them, the large banks, the old large banks, they are incumbents. They've done really not all that much to push out the boundaries, and it's really left to the newer, nimble institutions to do that. I guess I'd like to just make one previous point, Jyotsna, if you will, about the question you had about the alternative channels, and I just want to link that with what Amol mentioned about open banking. I think as open banking becomes a reality, and it will be the combination of it being sort of free to use, etc., and driven by the regulation that has come in, and gradual adoption, which will all have to be voluntary. That is when I believe the alternate channels that we talked about in the previous segment of this conversation will really gain traction. Because then the power moves from the institution, the incumbents, to to the customer, and how the customer then uses it and makes it available becomes really open to alternate channels. Coming back to this question, the way I'm seeing the banks and lending institutions seize this opportunity of interacting or collaborating with fintechs, for them it's really a buy versus a build decision. So theoretically, they can build all of this out on their own. Theoretically, they can do exactly what Utpal is doing. I mean, in his view of this rural market, which is all encompassing, it's such a powerful idea and such a fantastic way of looking at such a huge market opportunity. But as you grow bigger and larger, and as you get weighed down by a ton of compliance and regulation, you have to have these partnerships to really crack open the markets that sitting in front of you, but you just don't know how to get into it. And also from a practical standpoint, development of tech, etc., in-house, it's all sequential. There are priorities, so you may get there in 2 years, 3 years time, but a buy decision or to get into a tech partnership today is advancing that timeline by as much as possibly 2 years. And that's what's compelling in a partnership conversation between a fintech and a large institution. And of course, the whole customer service and the customer journey, which on a digital platform is, so much smoother. I mean, there are some kinks in that. I mean, KYC is honestly not the same experience for a bank fintech partner versus a NBFC fintech partner. So there are issues there and there are nuances there. But on the whole, the pandemic has also proven to these banks that the customer is ready. The point that Amol was making about customer being ready, I feel, at least this is my view, that pre-pandemic, let's say a year before the pandemic happened, people are a lot slower. And people were just assuming that, let's say the markets that, Sarvagram is addressing or the new markets that Discovery is looking at opening up would, eventually get there through the digital channels, and we can take our time about it, but that's not the case anymore.
And I guess even from a people dynamic standpoint, you've seen large institutions, microfinance institutions try and partner with non-lending products. And there is, maybe it's an interesting time when technology and the partnerships of distribution resources on the ground can come together to make it a lot more, gain momentum on this front. Earlier, I guess these partnerships would involve many hours of training field staff and educating them on things, whereas I'm pretty sure once you can hand them over a foolproof tech assistant, it's probably easier to get end customers to experience and understand propositions a lot more easily than what used to be. I will say I agree with you on the pandemic front. It's definitely changed perceptions of a lot of things. People have probably pushed at their own boundaries on what's possible and what's not on this front. To figure out how quickly they can adapt to technology. There may be folks who switch back out of digital payments, etc. But clearly it's more like a few steps forward and not as many steps back, even as people settle back to their old normalcies. We have a couple of questions from the audience. I wanted to, as we end towards wrapping up the session, I wanted to quickly go around the table to all four of you all on kind of a common question. I suspect if we had done a poll on whether the non-lending financial services piece will become larger than lending, et cetera, we may have gotten more yeses than nos. I'm curious if that's your answer, or if you feel credit is just so integral that it's never it's still going to be too large for it to be subsumed by the commercial opportunity that exists in other propositions like insurance or savings, wealth management, payments, etc. Just given credit remains central to our entire economy, especially as you go into the mass market. So I'm curious where you stand on that. And this is, I don't even know if we have a real number assigned to the credit potential in India, simply because a lot of credit actually resides within supply chains in India that doesn't even touch our financial systems. So it's not the sum of banks and NBFCs. It's not the sum of banks, NBFCs, and fintechs. It's not even the GDP, because the velocity of transactions in our economy is so high. Every transaction has a coupled underlying debt, which is considered cash discount. It can be considered anything within supply chains, right? So the day we figure out what the market size of credit is one thing, but I'm curious where you stand on this. And secondly, if you had a wish list of what it would take to fast track the beyond lending propositions to scale, what would those top couple of things be? So we'll have to do this as a quick fire run through across the group. So maybe I'll start with you, Chirant, given you've got the sharpest, leanest focus amongst the group.
Cool. I mean, I take that as a compliment. Thank you. So great question. And see, I think I'll answer the second bit first. And for us, I think really it's the ability to drive insurance in a manner that everybody recognizes the fact that it is a not just a need-based product, right? So unfortunately, nobody knows the future. Nobody can predict the future. So by definition, if you can't predict the future, there is risk associated with the future. So if that is the case, then why shouldn't insurance just be as ubiquitous as, say, digital payments, right?
What would your wish be? Like, what are you wishing for? More risks to play out, lesser risks?
No, not at all. I would suggest an ecosystem, a platform to enable this at scale, right? And unfortunately, that comes on the back of regulations. For instance, motor is mandated in India. So, and we are sort of, why can't health be mandated in India? Just as, and why not life be mandated in India, right? So all these are, specifically insurance specific use cases, and insurance is best designed to handle these kind of risks.
People realize the importance of insurance, some regulatory frameworks that kind of provides.
If you were to force it down, right? So now, would you, looking back, would you say demonetization, was that a good move or a bad move? Regardless of what you think about it, what you can't disagree with is the fact that it fundamentally altered user behavior towards payments, right? And then here we are on this panel, we are talking obviously about fintech, and we're all fans of what kind of happened, but demonetization probably was that tailwind to enable this on the back of, it's a wake-up call, and especially, and the same thing on the back of the pandemic, right? So insurance by definition has become something that is exclusive. It is not up for choice. It is something that we think is fundamentally right for everyone to sort of be part of that ecosystem, because nobody can predict the future, and the only way to force that is until the point where everybody in the ecosystem is at that point of same level of, say, access and affordability and sort of so on and so forth, awareness, force that hand, and sort of that is the way to do it. Not to say that that is the right way to do it, but that is one way to do it.
Sure. And just to the first question, if I were to take pin it to 2030, maybe by then, do you feel lending versus not just insurance, but everything else we've spoken about, what do you think is going to be a bigger market?
So, I mean, India is, a credit-driven economy, right? And at the end of the day, if you think about, financial services in general, in a way, you could argue that payments and CASA or core banking are the only sort of non-discretionary financial services, right? Everything else is discretionary. Sure. Credit is discretionary, wealth is discretionary, insurance is discretionary. And of that, insurance is the only one that is push. Everything else is a pull, right? And so my sort of hope is that it equalizes. It is sort of something that gives a level playing field to everyone. But given sort of how credit starved the country is, and the long gap, the big gap, the credit gap that we see, and the pull for that particular financial instrument more than the others, I would not bet on my point of view at this point in time.
Okay, fine. So cool. Utpal, same question for you. First, 2030, what's bigger, credit or everything else put together? Just curiosity.
I don't know.
Okay. If you had to guess, no marks for guessing right, and it's too far away for us to validate your views, but if you had to project.
I would say everything else would be as large, probably bigger than credit by 2030.
Okay, cool.
If
And what's your wish list? Top two couple of things that you think is required for everything else to get to its potential? The non-lending piece.
Public infrastructure. So the way, Aadhaar happened and UPI, is happening. If land registries, if, physical savings, if all of these infrastructure are, created, I think that's the only thing that is required.
Okay, cool. Amol, that should, curious what your thoughts are. 2030, what's bigger, and your wish list? I mean, I guess for non-lending to achieve its potential. Yeah.
Sure. So I think credit will remain the mainstream given the economic reality of the country, and we are credit deprived. I just remembered something which Utpal had shared with me around a year back as to how once a per capita GDP crosses that 3,500, 5,000 mark, how the discretionary and consumption-led use cases really go through the roof,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So if that's the hope and of course the feeling going forward, forget the government's 5-year plan, but let's say the next 10 years we are on that way there. I think the other use cases will step up. If I were to break your questions into, if you really see, will others be as big as credit? If you're asking in terms of users, if we take the formal users, there are 200 million odd registered bureau profiles, right? Would there be 200 million users for other use cases? My answer is yes. If we are talking of revenue pools, I think that's difficult, right? A credit product makes you 10% really on day zero. So that I think, but you will still have solid $50 million plus revenue companies, especially in big use cases, payments plus, and so on. So that's how I think it will play out. What needs to fall into place? So first, I think regulations have to be supportive. The partnership between new age models and technology plus license holders has to be really healthy, which will allow this market to develop. Second, public infrastructure, which Utpal has already touched on. Third, I think the customer has to be kept in mind when designing all this. Data privacy laws will get stricter. The customer should have clear information, opt-ins, opt-outs should be pretty clear, and so on. The last bit would be, there shouldn't be any walled gardens, which we have seen in other countries, where if you own a large ecosystem today, if Meta or Facebook or WhatsApp decided to do that, really it should be open to other product providers, or it should be combined with public infrastructure, which allows everyone to participate in that, because we will find disproportionately large platforms. Zomato today has an unparalleled user engagement since the past 2 years, right? So I think there, the provision of financial services should not be a walled garden. It should be open to different kinds of providers.
Sure. Thanks. Mona, your bet on 2030?
I think credit's still going to rule the roost, Jyotsna.
And what's your wish list, the top one, or, I mean, I guess if for whatever it's worth?
Well, public infrastructure for sure. I mean, continuing on that path, and that'll help everything in the ecosystem, that whether it's credit or non-credit. I don't think there'll be more mandates of the kind that Chirant was talking about, health being mandated, etc. on insurance side. But despite all of that, because there's going to be more focus on customers owning, customers taking their own decisions, etc. But I do believe that among the rest, insurance is probably going to be the biggest.
Got it. I'm going to quickly go around with a couple of audience questions. One was specifically for Chirant. This is in terms of what, in your view, is a major hurdle for subscription for insurance in India, barring, of course, government micro-insurance schemes, etc. And there's a question on how you see the sector grow, which I think we've covered. But very briefly, if you could just maybe answer in a minute or so as to what you see as the major hurdle for subscription in India for insurance.
I don't. I just see it as a natural evolution to where we are. Underwriters need to kind of sort of take notice of the fact that these are products and requirements of our other demand side, and basically build these out, test them out, right price them, go to market, and keep on iterating and build a healthy underwriting book on the back of it. Right. That's how every product has kind of panned out over the time, and that's I mean
So saying
why
tailor
would
solutions so that you remove the friction points,
yeah
essentially.
the customer wants the customer on the back of consumerization of FinServ wants all financial services also now on demand, connected, real time, and and completely contextual. So I think usage based models, subscription based models is it is also being has tested out. So a couple of carriers have already come out with usage based
Yeah.
motor products, etc., and that is just at the tip of the iceberg. There's a long way to go, and I
Got
don't
it.
see a fundamental reason why.
Quick question for Amol and Mona. Has the pandemic presented any newer and innovative models for the impact investors to invest in beyond lending? So what is the most exciting non-lending proposition that you've seen, which you feel is investable?
Mona, you want to go first?
Yeah, maybe because because of the pandemic, I feel the insurance piece has gotten more traction. At least institutions and organizations that have large customer bases, where they hadn't really looked at sort of insurance for them in a very customized way, and it was all bundled kind of stuff. I think they are beginning to look at it with a slightly different view, thanks to the pandemic. And I say, well, while there's health and all of that, but more because of the digital adoption that has happened, and the fact,
So similar answers. That's what we saw as well. Insurance, but an insurance plus, which tries to combine insurance with, let's say, better primary care at the ground level, given whatever we saw in the past 2 years. So we saw those models. We invested in a few. The second, I would say, was investing, which we all know how the numbers have ramped up in the last 2 years. Call it Robinhood investing or whatever. People had plenty of time on their hands, at least the urban folks, and we saw these two, where the journeys of the people, especially digital journeys of the people, it was compressed. A 5-year journey was compressed into a couple of years.
Got it. One question. Sorry, Mona, you were saying?
Yeah, I was just saying that one thing that the pandemic brought out in the context of people serving the base of the pyramid, they were surprised by how much they could achieve during the period of lockdown, etc., through accelerating on digitizing the workflows and so on, and how easily the customers, relatively easily, the customers were able to adopt those changes, and so I would say digitizing the workflow has also got a leg up, maybe, and the infrastructure piece that I was talking about. So apart from the product, that as well.
Got it. Utpal, the final question that probably pulls everything together: with low overall financial literacy levels in rural India, how do you see tech-enabled services models to be a success for the bottom of the pyramid clientele?
The financial literacy might be low. The data literacy is pretty high. Facebook did not have an army of people going out there teaching, how to interact. So we don't have to worry about their data literacy. And just, to back my statement with my own experience, on the day the first lockdown was announced, we really had to worry about where our next installment is going to come from. Each one of us in Sarvgram became a call center. We called up, we couldn't go and meet them. So we got them to download a payment app on their phone by telling them, press this, that, and the other. Got to link them an Aadhaar-enabled bank account with this and make a transfer. So this is a very complex transaction otherwise, right? But so just leave, data literacy to their awareness and how easy you make it by design to adopt it. WhatsApp is the height of that example of that design. They'll take care of themselves.
Excellent. No, this has been a really fascinating discussion. And I was just thinking about the 2030 question. I think my bets would probably also be on the credit side from a pure revenue pool standpoint. But needless to say, there is a massive opportunity that goes along with credit. To put it simply, I think pure lending relationships aren't half as exciting as a more exciting relationship that comes when you combine lending products and you look at all the other needs of the customer, which clearly goes well beyond lending, right? I think the customer's been long ready. My wish list would be for lots of entrepreneurs to, I guess, focus on the end customer segment and build DNAs that are designed for this customer. I think products need to be designed for this customer segment. DNAs of organizations need to be designed for this customer segment. And that's to start scratching the surface of the market potential in India. Just as how there's massive appetite for capital to flow into tech-led businesses, I'm sure as we look at more inclusive financial services beyond lending, there will be capital that flows to capturing this massive customer demand. Nobody minds lots of, it's a market that has a lot of purchasing power. And I think it'll be silly if we all collectively don't end up tapping into it sooner than later. Everything seems ripe for this space. So thanks, everyone. And I'll hand it back to the organizers.
Thank you, panelists, for a very thought-provoking discussion, and special thanks to Jyotsna for a very deft moderation. So with this, we'll end this session. And please do join us at 3:45 for the special fireside chat of SBI Chairman Dinesh Khara with Tamal Bandyopadhyay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyotsna.
Thank you, everyone.